My name is Grace Preston. I'm 33 years old. Last December, my father looked me in the eye at a private dinner in Manhattan and told 40 people I was a nobody. He's a CEO. He runs a mid-size investment firm on Park Avenue, the kind of place where men in navy suits shake hands over bottles of wine that cost more than my first month's rent. He's used to being the most important person in every room. What he didn't realize, what nobody at that table realized, was that the man sitting 3 seats away from him had just wired my company its $9th billion transaction. And he was about to stand up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love reading those. Now let me take you back 7 years to the Thanksgiving dinner where my father said the 6 words that changed everything. Actually, no. Before Thanksgiving, you need to see where I am now, just so the rest makes sense. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn Heights. No doorman, no view. The radiator clanks at 4:00 a.m., and I've learned to sleep through it. I keep 3 plants on the windowsill. A fern, a pose, and something I bought at a bodega that refuses to die. That's my luxury. I wake up at 5:15 every morning. By 5:45, I'm at my office in Tribeca. It's a clean space, glass walls, 23 employees, no art on the walls except a whiteboard covered in equations that look like nonsense to most people and look like money to me. The company is called Vidian Capital. We run a quantitative hedge fund, artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithmic trading. If those words mean nothing to you, here's the simple version. We built software that reads the market faster and smarter than any human team on Wall Street. Last quarter, our algorithms outperformed every major index by 11%. Assets under management, $14 billion. I don't do interviews. I don't do panels. I don't post on social media. My algorithm speaks for itself. Most people in finance know Vidian. Almost no one knows my face. And my father, Richard Preston, CEO of Preston Capital Partners. I haven't spoken to him in 7 years. No fight, no dramatic exit, just silence. The kind that settles in when someone tells you who they are and you finally believe them. That was fine with me, all of it, until a cream-colored envelope showed up on my desk on a Tuesday in November. My parents divorced when I was 13. My mother, Eleanor Walsh, taught 10th grade English at a public high school in Bridgeport, Connecticut. My father ran numbers. She ran sentences. They met at a fundraiser in 1988 and married 3 months later, which should tell you everything about how Richard Preston makes decisions. Fast, confident, and without asking anybody else's opinion. For 13 years, it worked. Then it didn't. The details don't matter much. What matters is this. My father moved to Greenwich. He paid $2,200 a month in child support, the exact legal minimum for his income bracket. He bought a 6-bedroom colonial with a heated pool, and he sent my mother a check that covered groceries and half the electric bill. 18 months after the divorce, he married Caroline. She brought a 7-year-old son named Derek from her first marriage. She also brought a talent for decoration, a membership to the Greenwich Country Club, and an opinion about everything. I still visited 2 weekends a month, like the custody agreement said. But every time I walked into that house, something had shifted. First, it was my bedroom. Caroline turned it into a home gym. Then it was the photos. My school pictures came off the hallway wall. Derrick's baseball trophies went up. My mother never said a bad word about any of it. She'd stand at the kitchen counter gratting papers and say, "Your father loves you in the only way he knows how." I believed her for 13 more years. I believed her. I kept showing up, kept calling, kept pretending the silence on his end was busy, not intentional. And then came the day I stopped pretending. When I was 18, I got a full scholarship to Columbia for applied mathematics. I remember the call. I was sitting on my mother's porch in Bridgeport, and the financial aid office said the words "full tuition," and my mother started crying into a dish towel. We drove to the diner on Route 1 and split a piece of coconut cream pie, and she said, "This is the beginning of something, Grace." She was right. My father had a different reaction. "Skip it," he said. We were sitting in his study in Greenwich. Derrick was in the next room watching cartoons. Caroline was arranging flowers in the hallway. "Come work at the firm. You don't need a degree. You need experience, real experience." I told him I wanted to study mathematics, that I was good at it, that the scholarship was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He leaned back in his chair. "Math? You want to sit in a classroom doing math while I'm building something real?" I said yes. He cut off everything. Every dollar beyond Thecourt ordered child support. No tuition help, no housing, no car, nothing. Caroline made it worse, the way she always did. She'd call my mother's house and leave messages. "Richard is heartbroken." Eleanor Grace is so stubborn. She thinks she's smarter than him. She told people at the country club that I'd rejected the family business. She told Derrick I was selfish. Derrick was 12. He started showing up at the firm on Saturdays, wearing a little blazer, sitting in on meetings he couldn't understand. Richard paraded him around like a show pony. I worked 2 jobs through college. Graduated magna cum laude. My father didn't come. He sent a card inside one line. Hope it was worth it. After Colia, I got a job at Whitmore in Banks, one of the largest investment banks in New York. Junior quantitative analyst. Starting salary $85,000 a year. I thought I was rich. I wasn't. Manhattan will cure you of that feeling fast. But the work saved me. I spent 14, sometimes 16 hours a day building trading algorithms, writing models, learning the language of risk the way my mother learned the language of Shakespeare. Line by line, late at night with a cup of coffee going cold. Nobody taught me. I taught myself. I stayed late because I refused to be the person in the room who didn't understand the math. I'd sit at my desk at midnight, headphones in, debugging a pricing model while the cleaning crew vacuumed around my chair. And I got good, quietly, steadily good. My second year, I earned my first real bonus, $4,200 after taxes. I walked into a jewelry store on Madison Avenue and bought a Cartier tank watch. Not to show off. I wore it under my sleeve. I bought it so I could look down at my wrist every morning at 5:45 and remember one thing: I earned this. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody handed it down. My boss noticed me. His name was Malcolm Harding, a vice president then. Sharp, old school, the kind of banker who read every footnote and never raised his voice. He started assigning me the complex models, the ones the senior analysts avoided. I still called my father once a month. He always answered. He always asked the same question: "When are you going to do something real?" Then came Thanksgiving, 2019. The last Thanksgiving I ever spent with my father. I drove 2 hours from Brooklyn to Greenwich on a cold Thursday morning. My mother had already declined the invitation. She stopped attending Richard's holidays years ago, quietly without explanation. I went alone. The house looked the same. The heated pool glowed turquoise through the back windows. Caroline had set the table for 14 family plus 4 of Richard's business partners and their wives. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins, a centerpiece that probably cost more than my rent. Derrick was 20, home from Dartmouth. He wore a cashmere sweater and talked loudly about an internship at Goldman that Caroline had arranged through a friend. He hadn't earned it. He didn't need to. I sat between a portfolio manager named Whitfield and his wife who asked me what I did. I told her I was a quantitative analyst at Whitmore in Banks. She smiled politely. Richard at the head of the table overheard. "Grace," he said loud enough for everyone. "Tell them about your big plan." I didn't want to, but he pushed. So I said it. I was researching the possibility of launching my own fund, a quantitative fund using machine learning models. Richard laughed. Caroline laughed with him half a second late, the way she always did. "A fund," he said. "With what money?" He looked around the table, inviting the room to share the joke. "You don't have the instinct, Grace. You have theories." He lifted his wine glass, smiled, and then he said it. The 6 words I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. "You'll never make a dime, Grace." I sat down my napkin. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I looked at my father and said, "Thank you for dinner." Then I walked out, past the heated pool, past the turquoise light, past the centerpiece and the crystal glasses and the 14 place settings. I drove 2 hours back to Brooklyn in silence. My hands didn't shake until I parked. That night my mother called. I didn't tell her what happened. I just said, "I'm okay, Mom, I just need to work." So I worked. In 2020, I left Whitmore and Banks. I took everything I'd saved, $230,000 plus a small business administration loan, and I launched Vidian Capital, 3 employees, a shared office in Jersey City with a tax preparer and a chiropractor. I coded the first algorithm myself, sitting on a folding chair at a desk I bought at a church sale for $40. Year 1, we returned 34%. No marketing, no press, just performance. Word spread through the quant community the way it always does, quietly in group chats and conference hallways. By 2022, our assets under management hit $400 million. I moved the office to Tribeca, hired 9 more people, started sleeping 5 hours a night instead of 4. In 2023, Malcolm Harding, my old boss, now a managing director at Whitmore and Banks, called me directly. He wanted to be our prime broker. He knew me as Grace Walsh. I'd been using my mother's maiden name professionally since the beginning. He didn't ask why. Good bankers never do. By 2024, we crossed $3 billion. I started using Preston again on legal documents. It was my name. I wasn't going to hide from it anymore. By 2025, Vidian managed $14 billion. Forbes mentioned us in a feature on I-driven funds. I declined the interview. They ran the piece anyway, focused on the algorithm, not the founder. That was fine with me. My father didn't call. It didn't call. My mother knew I was doing well. She didn't know the numbers. She didn't need to. 7 years, no contact, no birthday cards, no holidays, just work and silence. And a bracelet on my left wrist that my mother gave me the day I graduated from Colia. Sterling silver, thin, no inscription. She has the matching one. Then Malcolm Harding's assistant called my office. Grace, Malcolm would like to invite you to a year-end investor dinner in Midtown December 14th. Private dining room, 40 guests. He says it's important. I said I'd think about it. Then I asked who was hosting. Preston Capital Partners. She said a Richard Preston. Do you know him? I paused. 3 seconds, maybe 4. It's a common name. I said. I hung up and sat at my desk for a long time. The cream-colored invitation arrived by courier 2 days later. Heavy card stock, gold-embossed lettering, the Preston Capital Partners logo in the corner. I turned it over in my hands. I could have said no. I could have told Malcolm the truth, that Richard Preston was my father, that we hadn't spoken in 7 years, that the last words he'd said to me were that I'd never make a dime. Malcolm would have understood. He would have quietly removed my name from the list and never mentioned it again. But here's the thing. I was 33 years old. I ran a $14 billion fund and I was still letting one man's opinion decide which rooms I walked into. So I chose to go, not for Richard, for me, because I was done avoiding rooms. I called my mother Thatevening. I told her about the dinner. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "You don't have to go, sweetheart." "I know, Mom, that's exactly why I'm going." She laughed soft, the way she does when she's proud and worried at the same time. "Wear the bracelet," she said. "Always due December 14th, 8 days away." I set the invitation on my desk next to the monitor and went back to my models. 7 years of silence, 1 phone call, and now I'm about to walk into my father's dinner as a guest of his most important banker, and he has no idea I'll be there. If you've ever had to walk into a room where someone underestimated you, you know exactly what this feels like. Hit subscribe because what happens at that dinner, you're going to want to hear every word. December 14th. I stood in front of my closet at 5:30 in the evening and made a decision that would probably drive Caroline crazy if she ever found out. I picked the simplest thing I owned. A black dress, no label, no statement, knee-length, long sleeves, the kind of dress that says absolutely nothing about how much money you have. I slid the Cartier tank onto my wrist and fastened my mother's silver bracelet next to it. That was it. No stylist, no blowout. I pulled my hair back, put on flats. Flats because I don't perform power with height and ordered an Uber from my phone. On the ride into Midtown, I pulled up Malcolm's guest list on my tablet. 40 names, hedge fund managers, family office directors, 2 corporate attorneys, a retired senator, and there near the top, Caroline Preston, co-host. Derek Preston, VP, Preston Capital Partners. I read Derek's title 3 times. VP. He was 27. He'd been at the firm for 4 years, right out of Dartmouth. No master's degree, no analyst stint, no proving ground, just last name and a blazer. I set the tablet down and looked out the window. Manhattan in December. Holiday lights on Fifth Avenue. Taxis crawling. People on sidewalks carrying shopping bags. The city didn't care about my family drama. That was comforting. The Uber pulled up to a high-rise on West 57th Street. A doorman opened the car door. I stepped out, checked my watch, and walked into the lobby. 38th floor, private dining room, 40 people, and my father somewhere above me pouring wine and telling stories about the empire he built. I pressed the elevator button. The elevator opened directly into the dining room, floor-to-ceiling glass. Central Park stretched out below like a dark quilt stitched with street lights. Candles flickered on every table. 8 round tables, 5 seats each, white tablecloths, heavy silverware. A string quartet played something soft in the corner. The room smelled like warm bread and expensive cologne. 40 people, maybe 45, all of them standing, holding champagne flutes, laughing the way rich people laugh at parties. Not because something is funny, but because laughing is what you do while you wait for the real conversation to start. I saw him immediately. Richard Preston stood at the far end of the room near the windows. Silver hair now trimmed short, navy suit, gold cuff links with his initials, RP engraved in serif font. He held a glass of red wine in his left hand and gestured broadly with his right, telling a story to a cluster of men who nodded at all the right moments. Caroline was beside him, red dress, statement necklace. She moved between groups like a cruise director, touching elbows, tilting her head, smiling with all her teeth. Professional hostess. She'd been rehearsing this role for 20 years. And Derek, he stood at the bar in the corner, drink in hand, laughing too loud at something nobody else found funny. His suit jacket pulled tight across his shoulders. He looked like a kid wearing his father's clothes. None of them had seen me yet. I stood near the elevator, took a glass of water from a passing tray, water, not champagne, and watched. Richard raised his wine glass. Chateau Margaux. He always ordered the same bottle at important dinners. He clink-hecked it against someone's flute and said, "Loud enough to carry." To another year of building something that lasts. Everyone drank. I didn't. Malcolm found me before I'd finished my water. He crossed the room with that long, unhurried stride of his. 62, gray at the temples, reading glasses hooked on his breast pocket. Malcolm Harding always looked like he had just finished reading something important and was about to start reading something more important. He shook my hand with both of his. "Grace, glad you made it," he smiled. "Come, there are some people I want you to meet." He walked me through the room, introduced me to a family office director from Boston, a hedge fund manager from Connecticut, a woman who ran a private equity firm out of San Francisco. Malcolm was discreet. He didn't mention Vidian's AUM in front of other guests. He just said, "Grace runs one of the sharpest quant funds I've ever worked with." They nodded. They were interested. They handed mech cards. At one point, the hedge fund manager from Connecticut tilted his head. "Preston," he said, like the Preston. "Richard Preston. Are you related?" I took a sip of water. It's a common name. He accepted that people in finance don't push when you deflect. They file it away and Google you later. Richard was still across the room. He hadn't noticed me. He was deep in conversation with 2 men I didn't recognize, probably prospects given how hard he was performing. Caroline circled the room like a satellite. She hadn't crossed my path yet. Then Derek walked past. He was heading to the bar for another drink when he stopped mid-stride and stared at me. 3 full seconds. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes narrowed. And then he kept walking like he couldn't quite place the face, but knew it from somewhere. My hand found the silver bracelet. I turned it once around my wrist. Caroline spotted me 6 minutes later. She was making her rounds, touching a shoulder here, offering a compliment there when she turned and froze just for a moment. Then the smile came back bigger this time, sharper. Grace. She crossed the distance in 4 quick steps, heels clicking on the marble. My goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. Her voice carried. The couple standing nearest turned to look. Everyone, Caroline said, placing a hand on my arm, a gesture that looked warm and felt like a leash. This is Grace, Richard's daughter from his first marriage. She's been away for a while. Away, she said it the way you'd say in rehab or overseas or out of her mind. Not estranged, not pushed out. Away as if I'd gone on a long vacation and simply forgot to come back. Hello, Caroline, I said. You look well. Thank you, sweetheart, she tilted her head. What brings you here tonight? Are you someone's plus one? The question landed like a slap wrapped in silk. She said it with a smile. She always did. I was invited, I said. Her smile flickered. She looked at the invitation I'd set on the cocktail table beside me. Cream card stock, gold embossed, my name printed clearly under the words RSVP confirmed. Her eyes stayed on it one beat too long. Well, she said, how nice. She excused herself with a squeeze of my arm that left a white mark on my skin. I watched her walk directly to Richard. She leaned into his ear, whispered something. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. His jaw tightened. He sat down his wine glass, and for the first time in 7 years my father looked across a room and saw me standing in it. He came to me. Of course he did. Richard Preston doesn't get summoned. He arrives. He crossed the room slowly, buttoning his jacket as he walked, a habit I'd forgotten about. That small gesture of composure he used before every meeting. Caroline stayed behind, watching from the bar like a coach on the sideline. Grace. He stopped 3 FT away, smiled. It was the professional smile, the one he used for clients, not the one he used to use when I was 10 and brought home a math test with a perfect score. That smile was gone. What a surprise. Hello, Dad. I didn't realize you knew anyone here. He said it lightly, casually. The way you'd say it to a stranger who wandered into a private party. I know a few people. He nodded slowly. His eyes moved over my dress, my shoes, my watch. He was appraising me the way he appraised a balance sheet. Fast, clinical, looking for the bottom line. Whatever number he arrived at, it wasn't impressive enough to change his expression. We should talk, he said, dropping his voice. Not here. Come to my office next week. His office, his schedule, his terms. That was Richard. Every conversation was a negotiation, and he always picked the venue. I'm here now. I said, if you'd like to talk, we can talk tonight. His jaw shifted. He wasn't used to hearing no from anyone, let alone from me. Before he could respond, Derek appeared at his shoulder. He'd figured it out. The face he couldn't place at Heb-Bar had clicked into place. Wait, Grace, he looked at Richard. You actually came? Hello, Derek. Derek turned to his father. Dad, did you invite her? Richard's answer was quiet, flat, a single word. No. He said it like it was an answer to more than just the question. A server rang a small bell and the room began to settle into seats. I found my place card at table 1, the main table, 10 seats, right at the center of the room. Malcolm had arranged the seating. He'd put me 4 chairs from Richard with a clear sight line across the white tablecloth. Richard sat at the head, Caroline to his right, Derek to his left, Malcolm directly across from Richard and me, between Malcolm and a silver-haired woman who ran a family trust out of Greenwich. As I pulled out my chair, I noticed a small leather-bound booklet on each plate, the evening's program. I opened it while the servers poured water. Page 1, welcome remarks from Richard Preston. Page 2, a timeline of Preston Capital's 30-year history. Heavy on nostalgia, light on recent performance. Page 3 stopped me, featured remarks. Malcolm Harding, Managing Director, Whitmore and Banks, and below that in smaller type credit facility review, Preston Capital Partners. I read it twice. Then I understood this dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an audition. Richard was performing for Malcolm. The wine, the venue, the string quartet. All of it was designed to impress the one man in the room who held the keys to Preston Capital's credit line. And that man, Malcolm Harding, was my prime broker. Vidian's brokerage fees alone generated more annual revenue for Whitmore and Banks than Preston Capital's entire relationship. $14 billion in assets flowing through Malcolm's desk, managed by the woman sitting 4 chairs from Richard Preston. I closed the booklet, set it on the table beside my water glass, and I sat very still. My father needed Malcolm. Malcolm needed me, and nobody in this room except me knew both halves of that equation. The first course arrived, oysters on crushed ice with mignonette. The room settled into the rhythm of a formal dinner. Silverware clinking, voices dropping, small talk filling the spaces between bites. Richard took command of table 1 immediately. He leaned back in his chair, chat Margot in hand, and told the story he always told. How he started Preston Capital with $200,000 and a folding table. How he built it into a firm managing hundreds of millions. How Wall Street laughed at him in the beginning. He was good at this, charming, rehearsed. He paused at the right moments, made eye contact with Malcolm when he talked about risk, made eye contact with the Greenwich woman when he talked about trust. He never once looked at me. Caroline played her part. She nodded. She laughed. She touched Richard's arm at the dramatic beats like a stage manager signaling applause. Derek tried to impress Malcolm with a question about portfolio allocation. He quoted a sharp ratio confidently, loudly, and wrong, off by a full point. I saw Malcolm glance down Athai's phone and type something. A note, probably a flag. I ate my oyster. I listened. I said nothing. The silver-haired woman beside me leaned over. "You're very quiet," she said. "I'm a good listener." She smiled. "In this room, that makes you rare." She was right. The table was full of people performing. Richard performing for Malcolm. Caroline performing for Richard. Derek performing for everyone, and me. I was the only person at this table who had nothing to prove tonight. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say at a table full of egos is nothing at all. The main course arrived. The servers refilled the wine and Richard stood up. He tapped his glass with a knife. The room went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard held the Chateau Margaux like a scepter. "Thank you for being here tonight. 30 years ago, I started Preston Capital Partners with $200,000 and a card table in a rented office on 3rd Avenue. No investors, no connections, just conviction." He paused, looked around the room, hit every table with his eyes the way a good preacher works a congregation. "This firm is my legacy. It is my life's work. And tonight, I want to acknowledge the people who make it possible." He looked at Caroline. "My wife Caroline, who has been my partner in every sense of the word." Caroline pressed a hand to her chest, modest, rehearsed. Then he turned to Derek and my son, Derek, vice president of Preston Capital, the next generation of Preston leadership. Derek straightened in his chair, nodded once, tried to look serious. Richard lifted his glass. "This firm is my family, and my family is this firm." Everyone raised their glasses. The room murmured approval. He didn't mention me. I was sitting 10 FT away. And he introduced his wife, his stepson, and his firm, and skipped the daughter who shared his blood and his last name. Like I was furniture, like I was a water glass that someone had set in the wrong seat. Malcolm looked at me across the table, then back at Richard. His brow creased just for a second, a micro-expression. Confusion. He was trying to figure out why the host had just acknowledged everyone at the table except the woman his most important client had arrived as. I touched the bracelet under the table. I turned it once and I waited. The main course was wagyu, sliced thin with truffle juice and something architectural made of potato. Derek had finished his second cocktail and was starting on the wine. Alcohol made him brave. It always had. He turned to me between bites, loud enough for half the table to hear. "So, Grace, what are you up to these days?" Still playing with math equations. I sat down my fork. "I work in finance." "Finance?" He said it the way you'd say finger painting. "Like what?" "A bookkeeper." A few people laughed. Polite, uncomfortable laughter. The kind that means nobody actually finds it funny, but nobody wants to create an awkward silence. Malcolm didn't laugh. He watched. Derek grinned. "I'm kidding. But seriously, it's got to be rough out there for someone starting from scratch. No connections, no backing. Dad always said you'd figure it out eventually. Eventually is a long time, I said. I found a shorter path. The subtext went over his head. He turned back to his wine. But Caroline caught it. She looked at me with narrowed eyes, the way a cat looks at a bird that just learned to fly. Grace always was independent, she said to the Greenwich woman beside me, loud enough for the table. A little too independent, if you ask me. Some people they pull away from family, and then they wonder why nobody reaches out. She smiled when she said it, the practiced, pleasant smile of a woman who has spent 2 decades rewriting history in real time. I looked at Malcolm. He had set down his fork, his head tilted slightly, the way he did during quarterly reviews when he was recalculating a position. He was paying attention now, very close attention. Dessert arrived, a dark chocolate tart with gold leaf. Caroline chose this moment as the servers placed the plates and refilled the coffee. To make her move, she turned to the couple across the table, a portfolio manager and his wife, and said with perfect warmth, "You know, we tried so hard to include Grace over the years, holidays, birthdays. We always left the door open, but some people just aren't built for family. They'd rather go off and do their own thing." She said it like it was sad, like she was the disappointed mother, arms open, heartbroken, waiting for the prodigal daughter who never returned. She shook her head with just the right amount of wistfulness. Then she turned to me. Full eye contact. The smile stayed, but the eyes didn't match. "This table is for people who built something, Grace. What exactly have you built?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. 3 people at the table stopped chewing. The Greenwich woman looked down at her plate. The portfolio manager's wife suddenly found her napkin fascinating. I picked up my coffee cup, took a sip, set it back down on the saucer without a sound. "Something that keeps me busy," I said. Richard chuckled from the head of the table. "That's one way to put it." Caroline smiled wider. Derek laughed. The table exhaled. Malcolm's face was stone. I placed the embossed invitation on the table beside my plate. I smoothed it once with my fingertips. Then I folded my hands in my lap and looked at no one. That should have been the end of it. A quiet insult, a quiet deflection, and dessert. But Richard wasn't finished. Richard was never finished when there was an audience. My stepmother just told a roomful of CEOs that I haven't built anything. My father chuckled. And the man sitting across from me, the one holding the keys to my father's credit line, hasn't touched his dessert. If you've ever been the person everyone underestimated at the table, drop a comment. I want to hear your story and stay because the next 60 seconds changed everything. Richard pushed back his chair and stood again. He had that look, the half smile, the loose shoulders, the confidence of a man who has never been corrected in a room he's paying for. He held his wine glass like a prop. "You know what I tell young people?" He looked around the room, making sure every table was listening. This was his stage, his annual performance. Don't chase fantasies. Don't waste years on degrees when you could be building. Don't sit in a classroom doing equations when there's real work to be done. He paused. Let it land. Then he turned to me, my daughter. He gestured with the wine glass, Grace here. She chose theory over practice. She wanted to sit in a library and study algorithms instead of joining the family business. And look where that got her. I looked at him. "Where did it get me, Dad?" He laughed, not a mean laugh. Worse, a pitying laugh. The kind of laugh that says, "I love you, but you're a disappointment, and everyone here can see it." "Grace, I love you, but let's be honest." He looked at my dress, my flats, the absence of any visible luxury. 7 years and you still can't afford a descent dress. A few people at the table shifted uncomfortably. He didn't notice. "You'll never make a dime chasing algorithms. I told you that 7 years ago." He lifted the chateau. Margot smiled. "I'm telling you now." The room went still. 40 people. Nobody moved. A server standing near the kitchen door stopped mid-step. Caroline's lips curled at the edges. Derek nodded slowly like a verdict had been confirmed. And Malcolm Harding. Malcolm, who had sat quietly through the toast, through Derek's jabs, through Caroline's performance, set his napkin on the table. His face was red, not embarrassed red, angry red. I looked down at my wrist, the silver bracelet, the Cartier tank. I turned the bracelet once, breathed in, breathed out. Then Malcolm pushed back his chair and stood up. The room turned to Malcolm the way a courtroom turns to a judge. He was the evening's keynote evaluator. The man Richard had spent 30 years of reputation and one very expensive dinner trying to impress. When Malcolm Harding stood at a table, people listened. Richard. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who has delivered bad news to billionaires and good news to boards of directors and never changed his tone for either. "May I say something?" Richard smiled. He didn't know what was coming. He thought this was the moment. The moment Malcolm would compliment the firm, praise the legacy, extend the credit line. He gestured magnanimously. "Of course, Malcolm, the floor is yours." Malcolm straightened his cuffs. He looked at Richard, then at the room. "I've known your daughter for 4 years. The smile on Richard's face cracked at the edges. "You know Grace, professionally?" Malcolm nodded. "Very well, actually." Caroline leaned forward. Her hand found Richard's arm under the table. Derrick set down his wine glass and sat very still. "And I need to correct something you just said." The silence deepened. I could hear the string quartet had stopped playing. Somewhere behind the kitchen door, a plate clink-egged against a counter. The candle nearest to me flickered and steadied. 40 people, 10 at our table, all of them watching Malcolm Harding, managing director of Whitmore and Banks, prepared to contradict the host of the evening in front of every person who mattered in Richard Preston's professional life. Malcolm didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to face the room the way he'd faced 1,000 conference rooms and spoke clearly. Correction, one word, and I knew everything was about to change. Malcolm looked at Richard and spoke the way he spoke during quarterly earnings calls, with data, precision, and zero emotion. "Ms. Preston, your daughter, is the founder and CEO of Vidian Capital." Richard blinked. Vidian, he knew the name. Everyone at this table knew the name. Vidian was legendary in the quant world, the fund that had outperformed every index for 5 consecutive years, using AI-driven models that nobody outside the firm fully understood. It was the fund people whispered about at conferences and mentioned in investor letters as the benchmark they couldn't beat. Richard just didn't know who ran it. Vidian manages $14 billion in assets under management, Malcolm continued. His voice carried across every table. The room was perfectly still. Last quarter alone, Grace's algorithms outperformed every major index by 11%. He paused, let the numbers settle, and as of last Friday's independent valuation. Malcolm looked at me, a small nod, almost imperceptible, an acknowledgement between professionals. Ms. Preston crossed billionaire status, personal net worth. Silence, not the polite kind, not the kind where people are waiting to clap. The kind where 40 people simultaneously realize they've been watching a man humiliate someone who could buy his entire company with 1 quarter's returns. Richard's face drained. His hand, the one holding the chat Margot, trembled. The wine swayed in the glass. He didn't drink. He couldn't. Caroline's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That can't be right. Derrick's jaw dropped, literally dropped. Hell looked at me, then at Malcolm, then back at me as if he were watching a card trick and trying to find the hidden pocket. Malcolm wasn't finished. "Richard, I came here tonight to evaluate your credit line. I should mention Vidian's brokerage fees alone are worth 12 times your firm's annual revenue to my bank." He straightened his glasses. "Your daughter isn't someone who can't afford a decent dress. She's the most valuable client I have." He sat down, picked up his coffee, took a sip. This string quartet did not resume. The reactions came in layers, the way they always do when something breaks in public. Richard stood, then sat. Then stood again, half up, like a man who forgot whether he was arriving or leaving. "Grace, I had no idea." Caroline started crying on cue, perfectly timed. She pressed a napkin to her eyes and turned to the couple beside her. "This isn't fair. Richard built this firm from nothing. And now his own daughter comes here to humiliate him. She was rewriting the story in real time. She was good at it. She'd had 20 years of practice." Derrick went the other direction. His face flushed dark. He slammed his palm on the table. The glasses rattled and pointed at me. "So what? So she got lucky with some algorithm. That doesn't make her family." His voice cracked. She left. She abandoned us. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who was here every day while she was off doing whatever she was doing. Derek. My voice was steady. I looked at him the way you look at a spreadsheet with a bad formula. I didn't leave. I turned to Caroline, whose tears had already begun to dry. Your mother helped lock the door. The table went quiet again. The couple beside Caroline looked at her, then at Richard, then at the napkin she'd been crying into, which she was now twisting in her hands like a rope. Richard's voice came out, stripped. "Grace, can we talk privately?" he said privately, but every word he'd spoken tonight had been public. The toast, the jokes, the 6 words about dimes. He'd chosen an audience for all of it, so why should my answer be any different? I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When a room is already silent, a whisper carries like a shout. Dad, I looked at him. Really looked at the silver hair and the monogrammed cufflinks and the glass of Chateau Margaux. He hadn't been able to drink since Malcolm sat down. I didn't come here tonight to embarrass you. I came because Malcolm invited me to a business dinner. I didn't know it was yours until I saw the program. Richard opened his mouth. I continued. You asked me 7 years ago what I was building. Tonight you have your answer. I kept my voice even the way I keep it during investor calls. Clear, factual, stripped of performance. But I want to be clear about something. I didn't build Vidian because of what you said to me at Thanksgiving. I built it because I'm good at what I do. Your opinion of me then or now factored into my spreadsheet. His eyes were wet. Caroline had stopped crying. Derek had stopped shouting. The room was holding its breath. I'm not here to save your firm, I said. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I earned a seat at this table just like everyone else. Grace, please. His voice broke on my name. You had 7 years, Dad. I picked up my clutch from the back of the chair. 7 Christmases, 7 birthdays, you didn't call, you didn't write, you chose silence. I looked at him. So did I. Theclutch was small, black. It held my phone, my ID, and a lipstick I hadn't used. I held it at my side and said the last thing I would ever say to my father in that room. I looked my father in the eye. I didn't leave, Dad. You locked the door. He flinched, a full-body flinch like a man bracing for impact half a second too late. His hand tightened on the back of his chair. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. I turned to Malcolm. Thank you for the invitation, Malcolm. I'll see you at our Q1 review. Malcolm nodded once. Looking forward to it, Grace. I walked toward the elevator. My flats made no sound on the marble, no heels clicking, no dramatic exit music, just a woman in a black dress leaving a party that was never hers to begin with. Nobody stopped me. Nobody spoke. 40 people watched me cross the room. The portfolio manager, the Greenwich woman, the retired senator, the server standing at the kitchen door with trays they'd forgotten to deliver. Caroline, mascara smudged, napkin in her fist. Derek, hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. And Richard standing at the head of his own table, mouth half open, eyes following me the way a man watches a door close that he knows he'll never be able to open again. I pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. I stepped inside. On the table behind me, my invitation still sat beside Richard's untouched glass of Chateau Margaux, cream cardstock, gold embossed. The name Grace Preston printed in letters he'd tried to make invisible for 7 years. The doors closed. I was alone. The lobby was empty. A doorman held the front door and said, "Good evening, ma'am." And I walked out onto West 57th Street, December in Manhattan, 34 degrees. My breath made small clouds. The sidewalk was crowded with holiday shoppers and couples leaving restaurants and tourists pointing at the lights strung between buildings. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared. And that felt right. I walked 2 blocks, didn't call a car. I needed the cold. I needed to-breathe air that didn't smell like Chateau Margaux and expensive cologne and the particular oxygen that gets used up when too many egos are in one room. I stopped in front of a store window. Christmas display. Mechanical elves, fake snow, a train set winding through tiny houses. My reflection stared back at me. Black dress, flat shoes, Cartier tank on my right wrist, silver bracelet on my left. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "Hi, Mom," my voice cracked. For the first time all night, something slipped. "How did it go, sweetheart?" He said it again, "You'll never make a dime," in front of 40 people. She was quiet for 3 seconds then, "And what did you do?" I let someone else tell the truth, and then I walked out. "I'm proud of you, Grace." Her voice was steady. The steadiest thing I'd heard all night. "Not because of the money, because you walked out." She paused. Then, was it worth it going tonight? I looked down at the bracelet. Her bracelet, sterling silver, thin, no inscription. I ran my thumb across it. "Yeah, Mom, it was. We stayed on the phone for 12 more minutes. She told me about her fern. I told her about mine. Neither of us mentioned Richard again. I didn't see what happened after I left. Malcolm told me later over coffee at his office 2 days before Christmas. Here's what I missed. The room didn't recover. Guests started making excuses within 5 minutes. Early flights, babysitters, headaches. 3 of them approached Malcolm on the way out to ask about Vivian. They wanted in. They handed him cards and said things like, "If she's taking outside capital, we'd love a conversation." Richard tried to save the evening. He stood at the head of the table and said, "She's my daughter. Of course, she learned from the best." His voice was too loud. His smile was too wide. The people still left in the room looked at him the way you look at a man trying to take credit for a sunrise. Caroline was worse. She grabbed Malcolm's arm near the elevator. "Malcolm, please. Richard didn't mean what he said. He's a good father. He's under a lot of pressure." Malcolm removed her hand gently. "Mrs. Preston, I know exactly what Richard meant. I was sitting right there." Derek ran to the elevator lobby. He pressed the button 6 times. The car was already in the lobby. I was already outside. He stood there, jacket off, tie loosened, staring at the closed steel doors. By Monday morning, Whitmore and Banks called Preston Capital's CFO. The credit line, the one Richard had spent 30 years building trust for and one very expensive dinner trying to preserve, was placed under 90-day review. Richard called Vivian's main office that afternoon. He'd looked up the number, got the general voicemail. "Grace, it's your father. Call me." I listened to the message in my office. Then I deleted it. He called 4 more times that week. I didn't answer any of them. The weeks after the dinner were quiet for me and loud for everyone else. Preston Capital's credit line entered formal 90-day review. Not because I asked, not because Malcolm was punishing Richard on my behalf. It was independent standard protocol when a fund's AUM drops 40% in 18 months. The dinner just made Malcolm pay closer attention to numbers he'd been willing to overlook. Richard sent me an email, 3 paragraphs. I read it once. He wrote that he'd been tough on me because he wanted me to be strong. He wrote that the industry was unforgiving and he was preparing me for reality. He wrote that he always believed in me but expressed it poorly. Nowhere in the email did the words "I'm sorry" appear. I didn't respond. Caroline called my mother. "Tell Grace to call her father." He can't sleep. He's barely eating. My mother, who had raised me alone on a teacher's salary while Richard bought a 6-bedroom house with a heated pool, said Grace is a grown woman. She'll call when she's ready. Derek posted on LinkedIn a photo of himself at his desk, sleeves rolled up with the caption, "Excited about the next chapter at Preston Capital Partners." Great things ahead. Nobody liked it. His colleagues at the firm had been at the dinner. They'd seen everything. 2 senior partners resigned the following week. They cited culture concerns, and in the quant world the whisper spread. Richard Preston's daughter is Vivian Capital, the Vivian Capital. I went to work every morning 5:45, opened my laptop, ran the models, drank my coffee. The algorithm didn't care about family drama. Neither did I 2 weeks after the dinner. Richard walked into Malcolm's office at Whitmore and Banks. Malcolm told me this part later in January during our quarterly review. He said he almost didn't tell me. Then he decided I deserved to know. Richard didn't come to discuss the credit line. He sat down across from Malcolm's desk, the same desk where I'd signed my prime brokerage agreement 4 years earlier, and asked one question. "Is she happy?" Malcolm looked at him. "I think she is." Richard sat with that for 30 seconds. Malcolm counted. Then Richard said quietly, almost to himself, "I taught that girl nothing. Everything she has, she built alone." Malcolm didn't argue. Richard stood up. "I need to go." He walked to the door, put his hand on the frame, stopped. Malcolm, don't tell her I asked. Malcolm told me anyway, because he said he thought I should know that somewhere beneath the Chateau Margaux and the cufflinks and the 30 years of ego, there was a man who knew exactly what he'd done. He just couldn't say it to the person who needed to hear it. I sat with that for a long time after Malcolm told me. I didn't call Richard, not because I was angry, because I knew that one phone call wouldn't repair 7 years, because healing doesn't happen over coffee, because my father asking Malcolm if I was happy was the closest thing to an apology Richard Preston was capable of, and I had to decide whether that was enough. It wasn't, but it was something. In January, I wrote an email, 5 sentences. I drafted it on a Sunday morning in my apartment in Brooklyn Heights, sitting on the floor with my laptop on the coffee table and my mother's bracelet catching the light from the window. Dad, I heard you asked Malcolm if I was happy. The answer is yes. I don't need an apology and I'm not offering one, but if you ever want to have a real conversation, not as CEO to nobody, but as father to daughter, you know where to find me. Until then, I wish you well. Grace, I read it 4 times, changed nothing. Hit send. Their ad receipt came back in 4 minutes. He'd opened it almost immediately. I imagined him at his desk in Greenwich, or maybe in the study where he'd told me to skip college, reading 5 sentences from the daughter he'd spent 7 years not calling. No reply came that day, or the next week. Maybe one day he'd write back. Maybe he wouldn't. I'd said what I needed to say. Not to win, not to wound, but to leave the door unlocked on my side. What he did with that was his choice. I closed my laptop, touched the bracelet, and went to make coffee. 3 months after the dinner, here's where things stand. Vidian Capital manages $16 billion. We hired 8 new people, bringing the team to 31. I still get to the office at 5:45. I still wear the same watch and the same bracelet. I still don't do interviews. Preston Capital's credit line was renewed for 6 months. Not because of me. Malcolm's evaluation was independent. The numbers justified a conditional extension with stricter restructuring terms and 2 new independent directors on the board. Richard lost sole decision-making power for the first time in 30 years. His firm didn't collapse, but it wasn't entirely his anymore. Caroline went quiet. She stopped calling my mother. She stopped hosting events. 2 friends from her Greenwich circle pulled their invitations to the spring gala. She didn't fight it. Derrick is still VP, but the 2 senior partners who resigned took their client books with them. He's working longer hours, without mentors, without shortcuts. For the first time in his life, nobody is handing him anything. Whether that breaks him or builds him isn't my story to tell. My mother and I have dinner every Thursday at a small Italian place in New Haven. She orders the same thing, Riton with red sauce and a glass of house white. I order whatever's new on the menu. We talk about her students, my Fern, the book she's reading. We don't talk about Richard unless she brings it up. She rarely does. She wears her bracelet every day. So do I, 2 silver bracelets, no inscription, no stones, just silver on skin, worn by a school teacher and a fund manager who learned everything that mattered at the same kitchen table. I also started mentoring, a program for young women in quantitative finance, analysts, coders, mathematicians who look around their trading floors and don't see anyone who looks like them. I meet with 4 of them once a month. I tell them the same thing. The math is enough. You are enough. Don't let anyone's opinion become your ceiling. Here's what I know now. The people who tell you you'll never make it aren't predicting your future. They're confessing their fear that you will. And when you do, you don't owe them a victory speech. You owe yourself a quiet Tuesday morning, a good algorithm, and a mother who picks up on the first ring. That's my story. 7 years of silence, 1 dinner, and a banker who said what I never needed to. If this reminded you that your worth isn't up for a vote, share it with Somyon who needs to hear that today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.